And I can just imagine what it's like in Washington because of what's going on now with health care, and we can talk about that a little bit, and you're able to ask me any questions when I'm finished that you want to. But what happened by the middle of April, we knew that we had 4 weeks left. And at that point, there were starting to be discussions about we're going to have overtime. We're going to go into extra session because we're never going to be able to get all of this done. And the bills started coming. And I had never been exposed to an omnibus bill before. Now, I know in our Constitution it says that each bill has to have a single subject. But when those omnibus bills started coming, they were 65 pages. Now, I understand the health care bill was, I don't know, 1,000 pages, something like that. And the rules were changed this session early on because everyone was, that's just the way it was. We have a rules committee, and they changed it so that we had 12 hours notice rather than 24. It went from 24 hours notice. First, you're supposed to get bills before you vote on them. We only had 12. So I would leave the Capitol at night at 10, 11 o'clock at night. We'd be going into session the next day around 10 o'clock. And we had staff that would stay there and get the bills. And then I'd go home, get to bed at midnight, get up at 5, get back down there so that by 7 o'clock, 6:37, a summary of the bill would be on my desk. So when we say that Congress never reads the bills, I understand. It's absolutely, to me, it's absolutely wild that we're voting on legislation and that we have staff that reads those bills. Now, I would take them as, I took a speed reading class before I went into the legislature. And it was one of the best tools that I had because I would get a hard copy of that bill. Most of them are online, and we had our computers on the House floor. But I would read through that thing as fast as I could, and what I would do, I learned to pull out sentences or pull out words that would be relevant to my district. And then I would say to myself, okay, then I would go back and read the paragraph, and if it was something that was relevant to this district, then I knew that which way I was going to vote. But I had to also watch for other things that weren't going to be good for us. But staff was critical in this, and I would pull them over and I'd say, okay, is this good, for my district, or isn't good, and whatever it is. But I just want you to understand that this, in my opinion, has to change. I think we have to bring sanity into this process. The other thing that surprised me was the depth of the financial deficit that we, not only as a state, and we are better than others. I mean, Minnesota's always better, and it's always going to be, and I love the state, and this is my home. And I'm glad I don't live in New York anymore. I'm glad I live here. Because it's the type of people that we have, and it's the intelligence that we have in this state. But when you think about states like California and some of the, I have family that lives out there. They've got 10%, well, their employment is ridiculous, unemployment, but they've got 10% sales taxes and on everything, food and all of that kind of stuff. You realize that this deficit in this country is just absolutely insane. And as we were going through, all of these bills and voting and stuff, very often we didn't know how the stimulus package was going to affect us. Very early on in the session, we voted on an environmental bill to accept stimulus money for some of the environmental things, and also for transportation and construction and things like that, because I'm on the transportation committee. But even today, we were just talking about at dinner tonight, we don't know how that stimulus package is affecting us. There were tales that were coming with it that, and especially in education, and that I can talk to you with a little bit more confidence, is that there was money that was coming at us that we could accept, But we had to be able, at the end of when the stimulus funds were used and finished, we had to, as a state, continue to finance those things. And so I couldn't feel comfortable voting for all of that, and I would vote no on the things that I felt that were not fiscally responsible for us as a state. That we knew that there were some things that we had to vote on quickly now to accept that money, and that at the end of that time, we as a state had to produce the revenue, to solve that. So, and we'll talk about that, at the end when I tell you what's coming up, next. And so at the end of the day, the other thing that surprised me is the unallotment process. And we did not know about the unallotment. We were in committee. It was April 5th, I think, that the governor called us in at about 2 o'clock and made the announcement that at 4 o'clock he was going to have a press conference. That what he was going to do, and because a lot of the bills had passed, a lot of the spending bills had already passed, and he told us he was going to sign all of those spending bills, because he felt that that was the only way we were going to get through this session and get out at the same time. But we also knew that the spending, and a lot of the things that I did not sign all of them because I knew that we hadn't made a decision on the revenue side. We hadn't either cut costs or we hadn't generated revenue for it. And we were about $1 billion, maybe $1.5 billion short. And I wasn't sure how the leadership was going to handle that. We were having lots of discussions about that in committees. So the governor said, I'm going to sign them all. And he said, and then what we're going to do is that at the end, when we're finished, then I will be able to line item things. And we talked a lot about that. And I said, how can you do this? Is this legal? I don't know what it, but we learned that Minnesota is one of the states. First of all, we have to finalize the budget by Constitution. That's our constitutional obligation. Not every state has that. And I'm saying, I think that that's one of the best things that our forefathers have done, is to make sure that we balance our budget. I mean, that's just basic economics. We have to balance our budget. And so, but there is a provision in the Constitution that he is able to unallot if the legislature overspends. The governor now has the authority, he's the only one, to bring that spending down and cancel things in the legislation that doesn't meet the expenses. And so that's essentially what happened, and that's what he did, and that's the unallotment process. Is that the best way to govern? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. In my opinion, the best thing we could have done is to gotten together. There are two sides. That's why we're a democracy. That we need to come together on certain things. But what I found that's happening, and the why that we couldn't come to an agreement on it, is the House championed education, the Senate championed health and human services. And both of those areas can have runaway spending. And what we needed to do badly is to look at each one of those things, take a look at the runaway parts of those two things that are out of control. The health and human services, by the way, it was growing at a rate, and we were just talking about with the Hennepin County Hospital and so forth, but it's growing at a rate of about 20% a year. And, and we looked at, but I had constituents that